My name is Daniel. I'm 41. And until recently, I thought I had seen every shade of disappointment a marriage could throw at a man. Turns out I was still an optimist. The night this story begins, my wife Claire came home late. Hair perfect, perfume too strong. That look in her eyes like she was rehearsing a speech. She didn't sit. She didn't kiss me hello. She just folded her arms and said she needed to talk about something complicated. I knew that tone. I'd heard it once before, years ago, right before she told me she still had feelings for her old college boyfriend, Marcus. She'd promised it was over. She'd promised I was her choice. And I believed her because back then, I still trusted her words. But tonight she didn't hide behind soft tones or guilty glances. She looked confident, almost relieved. "I'm going to spend tonight with my old lover," she said flatly, like she was announcing a dentist appointment. "I need closure. For myself." I sat there for a moment, staring at her like she'd spoken a language I didn't understand. Most men would have raised their voice, begged, threatened, pleaded, whatever the moment demanded. But something in me clicked differently. I felt the anger arrive, then pass, like a train that never quite stopped at my station. She expected an explosion. Instead, I stood up slowly, went to my desk drawer, and came back with a sealed envelope. I placed it in her hand. I didn't explain. I didn't ask questions. I just said, "Perfect. He should see this first," and walked past her toward the hallway. She turned sharp. "What is this? Are you trying to manipulate me?" Her voice was louder now, shaky in a way she didn't want me to notice. I didn't turn around. Didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing anything on my face. "Open it when you get there," I said. "He'll understand." And here's where I'll pause, because what happened that night changed everything. Not just for her, but for the man she thought she understood. If you like these real-life stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and the moments that expose people for who they truly are, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapters. She stared at my back like she wasn't sure who she married anymore. But that's the thing about truth, it doesn't need to shout. Sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. The envelope stayed in her hand while she grabbed her purse and stormed out. I didn't follow. Didn't ask where she was meeting him. Didn't need to. She'd already told me everything months ago without realizing it. The restaurant they used to sneak off to, the hotel parking lot where they had their closing conversations. The places nostalgia pulls people toward when they're lying to everyone, including themselves. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought this was her night of emotional clarity, of brave self-discovery, of closure with the man she still romanticized. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the envelope she clutched in her perfectly manicured hand wasn't for her. Not really. It was for him. And the real audience was already waiting. Claire left the house like a storm that wasn't sure if it should rage or retreat. I listened to the front door slam, then the sharp echo of her heels on the porch steps, then the engine of her car starting too fast. And then, nothing. Silence. A silence I'd been living beside for months without realizing it had a sound. I sat back down, not because I was tired, but because the weight in the room finally shifted. It was strange. When your wife tells you she's going to spend the night with another man, you expect your body to shake, your hands to tremble, your chest to tighten. Mine didn't. Instead, I felt clear, almost detached, like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. Maybe that's what happens when betrayal stops being a fear and becomes a fact. I knew about Marcus long before she opened her mouth tonight. I knew from the little signs, the late work calls, the showers right after getting home, the sudden need to walk alone after dinner. The way she typed faster when I entered the room and flipped her phone face down like it was muscle memory. But the real confirmation didn't come from her. Came from him. Men like Marcus always slip up because they think they're smarter, smoother, untouchable. About 6 months ago, I got a message from an unknown number. Just a single line from a woman named Hannah. "I think my husband and your wife are having an affair." That's how the truth arrived. Casual, heavy, and annoyingly polite. She sent screenshots, timestamps, call logs, a few photos from a dashcam that caught them walking into a hotel together. Nothing intimate, nothing explicit. Just enough to show two people too comfortable in their lies. Marcus wasn't some tragic lost love for Claire. He was a serial cheat, a man who had been betraying his own wife for years. And Hannah had been collecting proof quietly, patiently, like a woman preparing for the moment she finally stops begging to be respected. She didn't want drama. She wanted clarity. And I understood that. So the two of us talked over the following weeks, not like co-victims but like two adults who had been living in parallel illusions. She wasn't explosive or jealous or bitter. She was tired, calm, precise. A kind of calm that tells you she's already made peace with the worst and is now only waiting for the truth to catch up. We agreed on one thing from the start. Our spouses deserved to face the reality they had built. Not with screaming or threats or revenge porn or anything illegal. Just truth. Pure, plain, unembellished truth, handed back to them in a way impossible to deny. So I gathered everything Hannah had sent me and added what I'd observed myself. Text exchanges between Claire and Marcus where she complained about me being boring, or how she missed the thrill of who she used to be with him. Messages from Marcus bragging about how his wife never suspects anything. A hotel receipt Claire forgot in her coat pocket on a day she claimed she was with coworkers. Nothing sensational. Just the kind of banal dishonesty that's almost worse than dramatic betrayal because it shows how casual the disrespect became. All of that went into the envelope I handed her tonight. But the envelope wasn't the endgame. The endgame was the meeting Hannah had arranged. She knew where they planned to meet. She recognized the name of the place the moment she saw Claire's message pop up on Marcus's synced tablet. The same restaurant where Marcus had once taken her for anniversaries. The same place where he told her, "You're my everything," while already texting my wife under the table. Hannah told me she didn't want to confront him alone. Not because she feared him, but because she wanted him to face the truth without excuses. Without saying she was overreacting. Without the option to twist the narrative. So she asked me if I wanted to be there. I said no. I didn't need scenes or shouting matches. I didn't want to watch Claire crumble. I didn't want to hear Marcus lie. But I wanted Hannah to have what she needed. Support. A witness. Someone who understood the language of disappointment without having to translate it. So I told her I'd drop something off at the restaurant earlier in the day. She simply nodded through the phone, like she knew what that meant without needing details. Claire thought tonight would be a romantic, bittersweet farewell. She thought she'd be the tragic heroine reclaiming a part of her identity. She had no idea she was walking into the cleanest, quietest collision of truth two liars could possibly receive. And as I sat alone in the house we used to call ours, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel smug. I felt done. Finished with pretending. Finished with carrying the weight alone. The silence around me wasn't empty. It was the sound of the last piece falling exactly where it belonged. Claire didn't text me when she arrived at the restaurant. I didn't expect her to. People don't reach out to the person they're betraying when they're busy convincing themselves they're doing something brave. But I knew the moment she walked through those doors, because that was exactly when Hannah messaged me. Just a simple, "She's here." No punctuation, no emotion. Just the same steady tone of someone who is past the stage of crying and well into the stage of clarity. Earlier that afternoon, before any of this unfolded, I drove to that restaurant myself. A quiet place on the edge of town, dim lights, leather booths, romantic jazz playing softly enough to make people feel expensive. I left an envelope with the manager, another envelope, not the one I gave Claire. This one was addressed to Marcus. Inside was a copy of everything. The screenshots, the call logs, the dashcam photos. A little note from me that said, "Your wife already knows. Talk to her. No insults, no threats, no moral speeches, just truth, undeniable truth." And as I handed it to the manager, he looked at me and said, "Do you want me to give it to him when he arrives?" I remember shaking my head. "No," I said. "Give it to the woman who asks for the private room." He didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. When I left the restaurant, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like finally setting something down that had been crushing my shoulders for too long. I didn't need to see their reactions, though Hannah wanted to. She said she needed that moment where the truth stops being something she carries alone. When she arrived at the restaurant first, she sat at the table Marcus had reserved, because of course he'd reserved it under his own name, still assuming he was smart enough to hide everything. She ordered water. She waited. She didn't text him, didn't call. Just waited with the envelope sitting on the table in front of her. 10 minutes later, Marcus walked in. Not with guilt on his face. Not with hesitation. But with that swagger men get when they think they still have the upper hand. He didn't even notice Hannah at first. He walked right past her toward the private booth he'd requested. And that's when the manager stopped him. "Your wife is already waiting," he said politely. You can imagine the look on his face. Hannah described it to me later. She said it was like watching a balloon deflate in fast motion. And before he could speak, before he could form some excuse or try to flip the narrative, the manager handed him the envelope I'd left. He opened it right there, in the middle of the aisle, under warm hanging lights and in full view of other diners. One look. That's all it took. The color drained out of his face so fast Hannah said she thought he was about to pass out. Then Claire walked in, wearing the perfume I bought her 2 anniversaries ago, wearing the dress she once told me she saved for special occasions. She looked around the lobby expecting Marcus, expecting nostalgia, expecting her moment of emotional closure. Instead, she saw his wife standing there, steady, composed, envelope in hand. She saw Marcus holding the evidence like a man caught in a trap he set for himself. And then she saw the manager pointing at the envelope she held in her own hand, the one I'd given her before she left. That was the moment everything collided. Claire froze. Her face went blank, then confused, then horrified as realization sank in. Hannah said she stood there like someone had unplugged her from the wall. She didn't open the envelope right away. She looked at Marcus first. She whispered something Hannah couldn't hear. Maybe, "What is this?" Maybe, "Why is she here?" Maybe, "Did you know?" But Marcus didn't answer. For the first time in years, he had no script, no charm, no lie prepared. Just the raw truth staring back at him from the 2 people he underestimated. When Claire finally tore open the envelope I gave her, she got to see exactly what I already knew months ago. The messages Marcus sent other women. The time-stamped evidence of his multiple affairs. The comments he made about her. "She still thinks she's the one I love. She gets too emotional. She's a distraction until I figure out what I'm doing." She read each page, her fingers shaking, her eyes darting between the paper and Marcus like the truth itself was slapping her. She thought tonight would justify what she'd been doing. Instead, it exposed her. Not just to me, not just to Marcus's wife, but to herself. And the thing about self-recognition is it doesn't lie. Hannah told me Claire tried to speak, but her voice kept breaking. She said Claire looked like she wanted someone, anyone, to tell her this wasn't real. But it was. And then the final blow hit her. The realization that I wasn't there. That I didn't come chasing her. That I didn't need to witness her collapse. My absence said everything. I wasn't fighting for her. I wasn't begging. I wasn't competing. I was done. Claire apparently stepped back, pressed her hand over her mouth, then whispered something like, "I need to go home." But home wasn't hers anymore. Not the way she imagined. While she stood there unraveling, I sat on our porch with a cup of coffee, watching the streetlights turn on one by one, calm, untouched, waiting for nothing. Because when the truth finally catches up, the person carrying the lies is the one who falls hardest. Claire didn't come home right away. I knew she wouldn't. People need time to process the collapse of the story they've been telling themselves. And that's what betrayal is, really. A story someone rewrites in secret until the truth finally tears through it. According to Hannah, as soon as Claire realized what was in the envelope, realized that this wasn't some emotional closure night, but a confrontation with everything she had been avoiding, her legs actually buckled for a moment. She caught herself on the edge of a table. Marcus tried to reach for her, maybe out of guilt or instinct or panic, but Hannah stepped between them without raising her voice. She simply said, "Don't touch her. Not tonight." That was it. No theatrics. No insults. No screaming match like in those cheap reality shows. Just a woman who had finally stopped accepting crumbs of truth from a man who had been lying for years. Claire stared at Hannah like she had never seen her before. Not as Marcus's wife. Not as some stranger. But as the woman she had unknowingly betrayed too. Another casualty of the fantasy she had been clinging to. I don't think Claire ever imagined the ripple effect of her choices. She only saw her own need, her own hurt, her own nostalgia for Marcus. She never once asked herself who else was being dragged through the mud so she could feel alive again. That's the thing about cheating. It always convinces people they're victims right up until the moment they're caught. Hannah told me that Marcus finally spoke, voice small like a boy caught stealing. He said, "Claire, let's talk. This isn't what it looks like." But betrayal has a funny way of revealing the absurdity of certain excuses. Claire just stared at him like those words had lost all meaning. She whispered, "How many?" And he couldn't answer. That silence broke her far more than the evidence did. When they both fell quiet, Hannah placed her envelope gently on the table between them, hers, not mine. Inside was a divorce draft already prepared. She had waited long enough. Claire asked her something. I only know this because Hannah recounted it later. She asked, "Did you hate me?" And Hannah told her the truth. "No. I almost envied how blind you were. It looked peaceful." That line sat with me the whole night. There's a strange peace in not knowing, in pretending the person you love would never do to you what you fear most. I'd lived in that peace for years without realizing it. Claire finally grabbed her purse, clutching it like it could shield her, and rushed past them toward the door. Outside, the cold night air must have hit her hard, because that's when Hannah messaged me again. Simple words. She left. I didn't respond. I needed her to handle her part of the truth alone. I needed to handle mine. When Claire finally pulled into our driveway nearly an hour later, I didn't meet her at the door like I might have in the past. I stayed seated on the couch with a book open in my lap. Not reading, just steady. When she stepped inside, I could hear the unsteady breaths, the soft shoes hesitating on the hardwood floor, the way she lingered at the entrance like she was afraid something inside the house had shifted. And she was right. It had. She stood behind me for a moment. I could feel her gaze on the back of my neck. Then she said my name, so softly I barely recognized her voice. Daniel. Not demanding, not irritated, not performative, just small. I closed the book and turned to look at her. Her mascara smudged under her eyes, hair no longer perfect, and that perfume she loved smelled different now, like something borrowed from a life that didn't belong to her anymore. "Did you know?" she asked. I didn't ask about what. We both knew the question beneath the question. How long have you known? How much did I not see? How many lies did you watch me tell myself? I answered honestly. Long enough. She nodded once, slowly, like her body weighed too much to move. She took a few steps into the living room and lowered herself into the chair across from me. Her hands trembled as she tried to place them neatly in her lap, but they wouldn't stay still. And then she said something I didn't expect. I didn't know he was like that. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even defense. It was a confession disguised as realization. She had built Marcus into something he wasn't. A fantasy, a memory, a version of him frozen in time where consequences didn't exist. I let her sit with that. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on our family photos, the fireplace, the rug we picked together last winter. She looked at all the pieces of the life she'd been casually risking, and her composure cracked. I didn't think this would happen, she whispered. I thought I could control it. I didn't respond. Some moments don't need answers. Some truths don't need help landing. She covered her face with both hands and cried. Not the loud dramatic sobs of someone seeking comfort, but the quiet, breaking kind of crying that comes when a person finally realizes they miscalculated the entire map of their choices. After a long stretch of silence, she dropped her hands and looked at me with red eyes. I don't know what to do, she said. I don't know what happens now. Her voice cracked, and for the first time all evening, she looked frightened. Not of me, not of Marcus, but of herself. And I realized then that the next part wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment or even about justice. It was about truth, every raw piece of it. And truth has a way of stripping people down to exactly who they are. Tonight had stripped us both. She waited for me to say something, anything, but I let the silence speak first. Because sometimes silence is the only honest answer left between two people who stopped being partners long before they realized it. She sat there for a long time, waiting for me to rescue her from the silence. That used to be my role in this marriage. Patching the quiet spaces, smoothing over the awkward pauses, stepping in to make her feel understood even when she wasn't telling me the truth. But something about the night had shifted the ground between us. I wasn't rushing to fill anything anymore. I wasn't leaning forward. I wasn't bracing myself for an emotional explosion. I was simply done carrying a weight she pretended wasn't hers. When I finally did speak, it wasn't with anger. It wasn't with bitterness. It was with a strange, clean calm. "Claire," I said, my voice steady, "you didn't just betray our marriage. You betrayed yourself. Over and over again. And tonight you finally saw what that looks like." She looked up at me, fresh tears in her eyes, and I could tell she hated hearing it because it wasn't cruel. It was true. People will fight cruelty. They'll deny allegations. They'll argue with blame. But truth, quiet, measured truth, lands differently. She swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to let it go this far." I almost laughed. Not to mock her, but because I'd said those exact words to myself months ago. Back when I still believed people accidentally fall into affairs, like tripping down a staircase they didn't see. But no. Affairs are built, brick by brick, lie by lie, small choice after small choice. They don't happen. They're constructed. And she had been building hers long before she realized the foundation was rotten. "Claire," I said gently, "you drove to a restaurant to meet another man. You put on your best dress, your favorite perfume. You looked me in the eyes and told me you were choosing him for the night. That's not an accident." She flinched, like the truth cut deeper than any accusation could. She leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling as if trying to hold herself together. "I didn't know you knew," she whispered. "I thought I could keep it separate." I nodded. "I know." That seemed to surprise her more than anything else. She blinked at me. "You're not yelling. You're not angry." I was angry. Of course I was. But anger wasn't the point anymore. If I let it dominate me now, I'd be no better than the chaos she chased. And I wasn't going to let her choices rewrite my character. "I've already felt everything," I said. "Months ago. You're just catching up." She covered her mouth with shaking fingers. Her shoulders curled inward as if she were physically folding into herself. "Do you hate me?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Slow, heavy, toxic. I shook my head. "No. Hate would mean there's something left between us to fight over." She looked down, her breath shaky, her voice barely a whisper. "So what happens now?" There it was, the question she'd been circling since she walked through the door. I stood up, not abruptly, not with any dramatic flair. Just stood, the way a man stands when the decision has already been made long before he speaks it aloud. "Now," I said, "we face the truth, honestly, without pretending there's anything to fix." She stared at me like she didn't understand. Or maybe she did and didn't want to. I walked to the hallway and returned with a folder. Not dramatic, not thick, just a clear envelope with divorce documents. Simple, clean, both of our names printed neatly across the front. I placed it on the coffee table. Her eyes widened, not with shock, but with the heavy dullness of someone realizing the consequences had finally arrived. "You already prepared this?" she asked. "A while ago," I said. "I just didn't hand it to you because I wanted you to see the truth for yourself first." She pressed her hand to her chest as if trying to steady her heartbeat. "Daniel, is there really no chance?" And for a brief moment I almost felt compassion for her. Not the old kind, not the rescuing kind, but the human kind. The kind you feel watching someone realize they misjudged the limits of another person's patience. "You walked out tonight," I said quietly, "thinking I would wait, thinking I would still be here fighting for you. But you turned your back long before tonight. I'm just turning mine now." She started crying again. Quiet, defeated, exhausted tears. The kind that come when there's nothing left to defend. But I didn't reach out. I didn't hold her. I didn't move from where I stood. We weren't those people anymore. After a long moment, she wiped her face and took a shaky breath. "I don't know how to do this alone," she said. And I answered honestly, "Then start learning. You've been living two lives. Now you can focus on one." She nodded slowly, as if digesting the truth in pieces small enough to swallow. I gathered my keys from the counter. She looked up, startled. "Where are you going?" "For a drive," I said. "I need air." The house was too full of echoes. Old promises, broken trust, the memory of a life that didn't survive its final test. When I stepped outside, the night was quiet. Not empty quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a new beginning, not an ending. I got into my car, closed the door gently, and let the engine hum beneath me. Through the window, I could see her standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, watching me the way you watch someone walking away from a burning building you didn't realize you set on fire. She didn't call out, didn't chase me, didn't try to stop me. She just watched, with the realization settling in her bones. This time, I wasn't coming back as the same man. I took one last look at her. Quiet, distant, resolved, and then I drove away. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady, the way a man drives when he's finally free of the weight he carried too long. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, and brutally honest about betrayal and silent endings, consider subscribing. New chapters always come after the truth.